The Standard Deviations podcast is a weekly production that looks at money, mind, and meaning, all through a psychological lens. Each week, psychologist and New York Times bestselling author Dr. Daniel Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest, experts in everything from finance to literature to wellness.
Hello and welcome to Standard Deviations. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby. I am joined today by a gentleman who wears many hats. He is the founder and a financial advisor at RLS Wealth Management. He's the host of the All About Your Benjamins podcast. He is the co-founder of the Advisor Growth Community. Welcome to the show, Justin Castelli.
Dr. Crosby, thank you for having me.
My pleasure, man. It's been a long time in the making, so it's good to have you here. So I always like to start off the podcast by letting folks know a little bit about you on a personal note and to humanize you a bit, but you do a very good job of this yourself. Anyone who follows you on social media is intimately acquainted with your Friday morning donut dates and, just your beautiful family. So tell us about something about yourself that we wouldn't know already.
I'm glad you gave me this heads up because this was probably the hardest thing I had to prepare for this episode. And just to any podcast host out there, I think giving your guests a little heads up is always a very appreciated thing. So the reason I say that is you mentioned I do share a lot of my life, and we're going to get into that here in a little bit. And on top of that, I'm pretty boring. So I don't have a lot of exciting things in the background, but I thought of two things I thought I could share. One of it is more personal, and one of it is I always like to hear other people and like some of the things that they aren't proud of that allows me to identify with them as well. So I'll start with that. So I do a lot of things, but I struggle to stick to a routine. And I think part of that is because I do have this shiny object syndrome, and I like to try different things and I move things around. And sometimes being a business owner gives you the flexibility that's nice, but also that flexibility can be used. So, a good example is I shift my workout routine around, which I wish I just could have a set time that I always was going to work out. In my mind, it's going to be 5:30 every morning, but it moves around. So one thing about me is doing all of these things that I do, you'd think I'd have a rigid routine, and I don't. I have a lot of balls in the air, and just kind of that chaos allows me to operate, and that's how I thrive. But the personal thing I was going to share is if I was not doing what I do, and I love my career, I love my business and where things are going, but if I could rewrite things and I was doing something different, I would be a music producer. So everybody knows I love hip hop, and it would be in that area. But I would love to know how to make beats and instrumentals, and that's what I would love to do. Like growing up in high school, every Tuesday was like, it's New Music Fridays now, but when I was growing up, new albums came out on Tuesdays. And I'd go to Best Buy and I'd buy the new album I wanted to get. I'd run to the car, I'd pop it in the CD player, break out the booklet, and I would preview each song. And I would look at who the producer was and who was on the album or on that track. So that's what I would be doing if I was not being a financial advisor and all the things I'm doing.
Yeah, man, I believe it's never too late too. I mean, I know you love your career as much as anyone, but it's never too late. You're a young guy, another decade at this grind, and maybe who knows, you'll be producing beats. So that's a good insight into your life. And I know that my brother who produces this show is a music guy and a music producer, and I know it's been fun to watch him move through that world, and it's very exciting. So I don't think it's too late. You still got a shot.
Awesome.
Let's
not hold our breaths.
That's right. So we're going to talk today about building a brand, building a community, but I wanted to start with this word that is everywhere, I think now in professional circles, and the word is authenticity. So you were on a fantastic panel at what I thought was the best conference of the year at WealthStack. You were on one of the best panels at one of the best conference of the year, where you and a couple of other young guns in sort of this social media finance world talked about how to build a brand online. And the word that kept coming up was authenticity. So, me being a psychologist, we always want to what's called operationalize something, which is basically take sort of a social construct and make it as concrete as possible. So in as concrete a way as possible, what does authenticity look like to you?
Well, I'm glad we get a chance to discuss this because, like you said, authenticity, aside from being a hard word, it's a buzzword right now. And I see a lot of people out there ripping when people say you should be authentic and be your authentic self. And I think it's true. A lot of people are using it. A lot of people are saying that we should be doing this, but being authentic is very important. Whether you're trying to build a brand or you're just trying to be a good human being and be a person. So the concrete, simplistic thing. What does authenticity look like? I think authenticity is effortless. I don't think that being authentic is something you can try to be. It's just something that you are. So if we think about today's age of social media, Instagram, whatever it might be, you can tell the people that are trying to put out a persona that's not really them. They try to make it look authentic, but you can tell. But then you have people on the other side that are just sharing themselves, the good and the bad, and you can tell that there's no effort behind that. That's just who they are. To me, that's what authenticity looks like. It's just it's just you being you, embracing the good and the bad, and owning it, and not apologizing for anything out there. So there's no there's no characteristic, there's no obvious that is authenticity. It's kind of one of those things that you know it when you see it because it's effortless. They're not trying to be something that they're not. There's no effort behind it.
Well, it's interesting. It reminds me a bit of the Supreme Court definition of pornography, right? They were trying to decide, what was the difference between pornography and art? If you see a nude sculpture in the Louvre, right? Is that pornographic or is that art? And the Supreme Court basically comes back and says, look, pornography, you know it when you see it. That's art. That's not pornographic. It's not problematic. You know it when you see it. And I feel that way about authenticity. But again, the psychologist in me feels a little bit, no, we've got to define this. We've got to put this in a box. So I want to talk a little bit about my experience of people living authentically and inauthentically from having been a therapist. And then I want to follow up with this idea of effortlessness. One of the things that I saw in therapy back when I was in clinical practice was one of the biggest problems with living inauthentically was if people liked you. Let's say you're living a life that doesn't feel congruent. You're living a life that feels inauthentic. And people like you. You make friends, you meet people admire you. It was a hollow kind of admiration. It was always kind of a hollow sort of friendship because there was always this thought in the person's mind that if they really knew me, they wouldn't like me. Like, sure, this person's my friend. Sure, this person respects me or likes me. But if they knew the real me, they wouldn't really like me. So I think you make a great point that we're talking about this in the context of perhaps building a brand and building a business. But I think just for life stuff, living congruently, living authentically is important if we want, any of the good stuff in life to stick to us, because I think it doesn't otherwise.
Agreed. And it would be a hard, miserable life trying to constantly live this lie that you're putting out there. So you put this inauthentic self out. People really like that. They're drawn to that. And you've got to maintain that knowing that that's not you. So not only do you have just the regular stressors of life that you're going through as a human being, but now you have this persona to keep up, and eventually it's going to crumble. And then you're miserable at that time when it crumbles. All of the people that you thought or that they thought liked you now no longer like you because they know you're a fake and you're not really who they are, and it's just miserable. And it's just so much easier to just be yourself, but it's hard. It's hard to do. And I also think that what makes it hard to be authentic, I think we might hit the record for the use of authenticity and authentic in one conversation, is I don't know if everybody knows themselves. And not that you need to get too deep and get too introspective, but I don't know if a lot of people really know who they are to be able to really let themselves out there, because maybe they have to be a certain image for the profession. I think of financial advisors, and I didn't realize how unhappy I was and how much I was holding back in my previous firms until I went out and started my own firm and just wanted to do things my way. And if in those previous employers, if you would have asked me, I would have never said I was unhappy, but I wasn't really getting to be myself and be fully who I am. And once I launched my firm, that was where the light bulb went off that, hey, I wasn't being fake, but I wasn't really being myself. And now I get to be myself, and it's a lot more fun. I'm building better relationships with more people. So I think that somehow figuring out, and this is maybe where you can help people, just give them some low-hanging fruit. How do we figure out who we are? How do we look inside to really determine who we are, who our authentic self is, so that we can share that with the world?
Well, this is a lot of what my writing and thinking has been about recently because, yes, there's good research that shows that other people know you better than you know yourself. Like there was a fantastic study done that showed that your coworkers, the people you share a cubicle wall with, better descriptors of your personality than you are yourself, because each of us sees our own behavior and our own personalities through this sort of distorted lens of us wanting to be a certain way, answering questions in a socially desirable way. Other people see us for who we really are. So I think, part of this, you make a great point, is if left to our own devices, we may not even know what authenticity looks like. And I think that the way to discover who we are is less about, meditating, less about reading books, perhaps, more about putting yourself in difficult situations, more about coming into contact with people who have a different worldview, a different way of operating. And I think you sort of discover the parameters of your personality as you come into contact with other people who move through the world differently than you do. Because I don't even think a lot of people know who they are well enough to be authentic. And that's sort of a big first step.
And I think that's why a lot of people hate on when they're told to be authentic, or they see people talk about being authentic, because they themselves don't know how to be authentic. So it's easier for them to bash on that idea. And I do get that a lot of people say that and they're just saying it to say it. But I do think it's, as I said earlier, I do think it's very important to just be yourself in everything that you do. We talked about friendships and also in business, but I do think that's part of the reason there's so much being made fun of this term and this concept, is because not everybody is capable of being authentic yet, just because they haven't had that opportunity to find themselves.
Yeah. So I want to talk for a minute about this notion of effortlessness. There's parts of it that I like, and there's parts of it that I wrestle with. When I think about parts of, if I moved through the world as effortlessly as I could, right? If I did what came most naturally to me, I am naturally some unpleasant things. Like I am sort of naturally impatient. That's the big one that comes to mind, right? Like I'm sort of naturally impatient. I'm not naturally very detail oriented. So in some respects, that is authentically who I am. I'm not a detail oriented person. I'm not a patient person, but that's not who I want to be. So what responsibility do we have to try and be different than we are when we recognize things about ourselves that are maybe our sort of initial or easiest or under stress response, but are not, is that inauthentic if we're trying to better ourselves and show this better face to the world?
I think the key there is better ourselves. If you are maybe not sharing this quality that you're not proud of because you're trying to better yourself, I don't necessarily think that's being inauthentic. I think being inauthentic would be if you know you're not detail oriented, going out there and preaching that you are detail oriented and pretending that you are. I think that's where the inauthenticity comes in, but just not showing that part of your personality doesn't necessarily make you inauthentic. I think you can flip it though. I think you can use this social sharing to help you improve yourself. So you can put it out there that, hey, I'm not perfect. Here's one of the things I struggle with. First thing I said was, and I didn't even think about this, I'm not good at staying to a schedule. I change my schedules around. I can tell people that, and I can say that I'm working on this, and I can use the community and my network effect to help me be accountable and maybe get better, and also get some feedback from people that have had that problem and have gotten better as well. So I think that the inauthentic part is saying that you're not something that you are. Because eventually people are going to find out that you aren't detail oriented and you were just lying. And then it becomes, well, what else are you lying about? What else is Dr. Crosby faking? But if you just choose not to share that because you're not proud of it, I don't think that's being inauthentic. I think going to sharing my family and why I ever started doing that, I don't know. I think partly just because that's me. Like I just am so family oriented. I love my boys so much. I love my wife so much. I'm so proud of my wife that it's hard for me not to share it with the world. So it just naturally happened. But like everybody who's a parent knows that you yell at your kids, you spank your kids, or whatever discipline you choose. I don't share those things, but I also don't go run around saying that I have a perfect family life and that my kids never disobey me and I don't have to ground them and take their Xbox away. I just don't show those things, not to be fake, but just that's not what I choose to share. I think if I said that my family's perfect and all I ever did was show all this perfect life and make it seem like that, like I think of like the Instagram families out there, that to me is what's inauthentic. But showing the highlights of a basketball game or the funny faces that Silas might make, I don't think is showing a pretend life, that there's not things on the other side that is normal with everybody else when it comes to the way kids act.
Yeah, so sharing these weaknesses en route to being better at them, using your community to sort of hold you accountable to make you better. I really like this idea. So, just sort of a final note here. One of the things that I found, this is like I'm not a therapist anymore, so I can admit this, is you look over your week, you have 40 or 50 clients or whatever it was that week. And there were people on the calendar you were always excited to see, and there were people on the calendar where you just kind of groaned, right? I mean, this is probably true of financial advisors and anyone else. I mean, there's just certain people you're like, oh God, like I gotta talk to this person, Tuesday at 2:00. And some of the people I met with at first, I found them, boring, obnoxious, whatever, until I heard their story, and like that was one of the simple truths that emerged to me. And one of the reasons why I'm so grateful for having spent some time as a therapist is I really learned that no one's uninteresting when you know their whole story. And so that to me is the point of this talk of authenticity, is to give each other some dimensionality, give each other some realness, because we often interact, solely along this dimension of finance and world of work. And I think that being authentic gives us some edges, gives us some dimension, and allows us to be more interesting to other people. There's also a psychological bias that I think a lot of people don't know about that's called the Pratfall Effect. I would encourage everyone to kind of check it out. They asked reviewers how likable someone was, and they sort of gave them 3 different conditions. And this was a politician, or someone pretending to be a politician. The first person goes up and delivers their speech flawlessly. They run up the stairs to the podium, they go up and they just crush their speech. The second person trips a little bit going up the podium, delivers the speech very competently, very well, but like spills a little bit of their coffee on them during the speech, makes a joke about it, and then finishes the rest of the speech. So there's a little bit of bumbling, but ultimately competence. And then the last person is just kind of a goofball. Like the last person is kind of fumbling with their papers, delivers kind of a crummy speech. And the person that people rated as most likable was the second person. The person who was overall competent, but showed, moments of humanity. And I think that there's something powerful in this research around the Pratfall Effect. And I'd encourage everyone to dig deeper on this, is that we want someone who is, yes, ultimately competent, but also a real person, like someone who can admit to their flaws and their foibles, can talk to you about the things that they're working on. It doesn't lessen you in other people's eyes. It actually makes you more likable and more powerful. And I think that's good to keep in mind.
I would have guessed the second person if you had asked me. So I'm glad I would have passed that test. But it goes to the point of that person is a human, and you can relate to somebody that you view kind of on a level plane. And I think that, part of this episode is about brands, and that's something that I've really become very interested in with financial advisor space, is having a personal brand as a financial advisor. That's another buzzword. That's another topic that people make fun of, but it's very true. And the reality of it is, everybody has a brand already. It's just your reputation. It's just some people decide to take that and package it up and tell the world about it, and other people don't. And I think that telling the world your expertise, but also sharing some insight to who you are as a person, is the recipe for a successful brand, especially in our space as financial advisors. Letting people know that you're an expert, letting them know what you're like, because then they get to see who you are as a person and decide whether or not you would be a good fit for working with them.
Yeah. So I want to last question, and then our poor listeners will never have to hear the word authenticity ever again. So last question here. You talk about creating a brand, and I think you're absolutely right that whether or not you are purposefully cultivating a brand, you have one. It's just your reputation. It's what people expect from you. I think some people in our little world, in our little financial Twitter world, have been more intentional about this than others. And I think some folks have sort of a thing. You think about Doug Boneparth and coffee. You think about Tyrone Ross Jr. and gratitude. You think about Lawrence Hampton and doing front squats. These are all people who have sort of an identified thing. And I don't think anyone questions that all three of these gentlemen, really, really are passionate about the things in question. But how do you think about having a thing and having a brand? And when does it become shticky, right? Like, when does it become sort of too much? Or when do you become sort of two-dimensional because you're just operating within the parameters of the brand and you ironically start to lose authenticity?
So let's take a step back, because I know all three of those gentlemen. And I would also add with Lawrence, just giving him a shout out, it would also be the tube socks that is part of his thing with the squats. But those things that they had, now, those were all always in them. Doug has always been a coffee guy. Tyrone has always been a gratitude person. But it took them to slowly being their authentic self, using the word again, sharing that with the Twitter community, because that's where all those really started. And just sharing that because that's what they enjoy, that's who they are, and it was just natural for them to share that. I can almost guarantee, without speaking to any of them, they never second guess posting anything about coffee, squats, or gratitude, because that's them. And when you start to do that, that's not every post they put out there, but when you start to do that, people will start to grasp onto it. And now there's engagement on those topics, which brings more conversations. And then slowly this brand develops. So I don't think that you can go out day one and say, here's my brand. Here's what I'm going to be. Here's my Nike swoosh and my just do it. I think you go out there and it starts with just being yourself. And as you are yourself, it just naturally builds. And the way I can speak to that is that's what happened with me. Like, when I started doing my blogging and doing the podcasting and everything that I do, I had no game plan other than I want to create content. And it was fun and I was sharing different things. But then it became that now I have this kind of persona that I didn't intentionally create. It just formed itself. And that's what happened with these three gentlemen. When does it become sticky? I think it's when, so another buzzword that I really love is being genuine. I think you have to do things for the right reasons and being genuine in why you go into it. I think when you take this concept of coffee or whatever it might be, and now you start thinking about making it something more than it really is, making it something more than you just enjoy, that's when you begin to cross over into the line where people are starting to see, okay, this is not authentic anymore. He's trying or she's trying to use this to do something else. All three of those gentlemen, those examples, I don't think they've crossed over there. I think it is something that is them. And you look at Doug, he's been able to kind of do some partnerships with that. He sent the coffee around to some of his friends. That was kind of a partnership with Compass Coffee. But that was genuine and authentic. That's him. Doug is a caring person. He wanted to do something nice for his friends. He's a coffee guy. He got together with Compass and created his own roast of beans. So I think the line that you step over is when you start sharing these or using these ideas or brands for more than just because that's you, if that makes sense. And I know that my belief system of all this is very utopian. It's very loose and not very concrete, but that's the way my mind works. And it won't work for everybody. But I think that if you just go in for things for the right reasons with no major expectations, that's when good things happen. When you go into something with set expectations of here's why I'm going to talk about coffee and this is what I want to accomplish, I think that things pull away and people pick up on that and it's not as effective. Which is why I think that when we look at like the influencer business that's out there, my wife, typically the influencer business is very heavy with women. And my wife is telling me how annoying it is now to see these influencers on Instagram and seeing these businesses work with them because they know it's not authentic. They know everything that they're doing is fake and for show, and people are starting to pick up on it. Now, my wife started following them early on because they were doing it authentically. They were doing it because that's something that they enjoyed, a passion they wanted to share with other people. And as they got success, businesses came in, and then it became something more than just somebody doing something because they enjoy it. So I think that's where the line gets stepped over.
Well, I think the reason that all three gentlemen that we mentioned have been so successful with creating these brands is because, like you said, it is a natural extension of who they are. I think that's one thing. It's totally congruent with who they are. I think that's like the important first step. And then I think an equally important second step is that they add other value, right? I mean, it's not just a coffee account. It's not just a squats account. I mean, Lawrence has some like incredibly insightful research into markets. And then, you've got, you add a little other dimension by seeing the tube socks, the tube socks in the workout videos. And so I think as long as you're acting in a congruent way and as long as you're adding other value, it's sort of the cherry on top, and it doesn't become, this ulterior motive that you're talking about with your wife and some of these influencers. And, one thing I think I'll probably never be able to quantify this or concretize it to the extent that I would like. But I have seen time and again that people have a sixth sense for nonsense. Like, people have a sixth sense for acting in bad faith. People have a sixth sense for ulterior motives, and people can smell disingenuous behavior from 100 miles away. And I do believe that, even though I can't say exactly the mechanism by which that happens.
There are just some things that can't be explained. One last piece on this before we move on. You can make powerful movements by doing that. You look at Tyrone with his gratitude movement, like all of the things that went on around the holidays with paying off layaway and bringing socks in November. But like, you look at Sonia Dreisler and what she's doing with, like, she has developed her brand in her area that she's in and moving things forward in our profession for women in the profession. So like, not only do these have to be fun things, you can leverage these things to really create a movement and move professions or the world forward, which is what's so cool about all of this.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The two people you just mentioned have done incredible work and they've taken their brands, which are natural extensions of who they are, and they've used it to bless the world in a big way. And it's really fun to watch and be a part of in a small way. So I want to transition now. We will ban the word authenticity from the entire second half of this podcast. We are disallowed from saying it. So if you're still with us, dear listeners, right? So we want to talk about community for a minute now. This is something that fascinates me. You're in the midst, I think, like a year and a half into building the advisor growth community. Anecdotally, I've heard fantastic sort of testimonials from people who are involved there. I want to hear from you sort of what's your recipe for a good community? And then, the flip side of that, are there any things that derail a tight-knit community?
So, the advisor growth community is been a fun experience, and it's been less than a year. Taylor Schulte is my partner in it and starting it, the co-founder, and we started it in August. The concept started in August. In October, we rolled it out, and here we are in January. We just welcomed some new members during our open enrollment period. A community was not something I ever thought I would set out to build. And an interesting kind of dynamic in the way things flow. With my advisory business, I never really had a niche. And last year, I realized I really enjoy working with entrepreneurs. And long story short, my end goal for this entrepreneur relationship I was going to create was I wanted to create a community of entrepreneur clients of mine that if you were an entrepreneur in Indianapolis area, you wanted to be a part of it. And the only way to be a part of that community was through my firm. And so I had this concept of trying to build a community within my clients. And then when Taylor and I got to talking, I realized, okay, community was something I was going to build. Entrepreneur was where I was going to be, but it was going to be with financial advisors. So we had this idea of there's no real good place for financial advisors to get together and collaborate and grow together doing our own businesses. Twitter kind of feeds a little bit of it, but there's a lot of nonsense that goes on with it. You have limited characters. So we just built this online community. And I think the recipe for success has been nothing that Taylor and I have done other than providing a place for people to join. It's been the members that have joined. So I think the key to building a community, which is another, I think I see this word more and more, it's attracting people that have a similar mission, have a similar goal, have similar views on whatever it is at hand. And it doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be, an echo chamber. If you look at our makeup of our community, we have, I think it's 84, 85 members at this time. And they are all over the board when it comes to financial advisors. Different business models. Some are CFP, some are not. Some have been in the business less than a year. Some have been in the business 20 years. But the common thread that pulls us all together is we are all interested in growing for the future. We're not interested in staying in where the profession has been. We're interested in growing for the future, building our businesses for the long term. So that's the common thread. And we can all do it different ways with different experiences. And the collaborative nature of these individuals has been what's made it so strong. So I think a key recipe is the common mission. I think it's attracting people that are willing to give more than they're going to take from the community. Meaning, you can't have a bunch of people in there just watching the threads, taking, and never giving back, because then no one's ever going to give. But if you have a community member or members with a mindset of, I'm going to give just as much as I take, now you have real good dialogue. Now you have people growing and learning from each other because everybody's sharing different things that they're doing, and we can all take that and tailor it to our businesses. So those are the big thing. I think the downfalls or the things that could derail a good community are just the opposite. If you have people that aren't willing to collaborate, if you have people that aren't on the same path, then I don't think that community succeeds. And not that the community is going to be right for everybody. You can see these communities all over the place. Twitter, there's FinTwit, but I've heard there's other types of twits out there. Like my sister-in-law is a writer, and there is a writer twit, I don't know what they call it, on Twitter. And you're seeing these people, but what brings them all together is this common thread. So for FinTwit, it's finance. But for the advisor growth community, it is growing as advisors. Another big dynamic for our community is not just professionally, but personally. So how can we become better people, have better work-life balance, be better spouses, parents, whatever it might be? That's a part of what we're all interested in as well.
Yeah, this thing fascinates me because if you look at the research on high-performing teams and psychological diversity, so sort of diverse with respect not to race or gender, but diversity with respect to sort of the way you see the world and your personality, teams that are psychologically diverse fight more, they take longer to make a decision, but they also make better decisions, make more money, and tend to be more successful. So it's an interesting thing to think that on the one hand, if your group is, if a group that's all about growth and progress is totally homogenous, then, you're going to stagnate. You're not going to go anywhere. It'll be an echo chamber. But groups that are diverse with respect to mindset also have to manage some hurdles. But I think the common ingredient that you have is a shared end, right? You have a shared end, even if there are different means to that end. So if there's that shared value, that shared vision, I think the small differences get ironed out and everyone grows as a result of the different perspectives. So it'll be fascinating for me to watch the two of you continue to nurture and grow this community over time.
I think you're going to see more communities like this grow because by nature, and I don't have any scientific data, this is just what I've observed, people like to be a part of a community. And I'm bad about this. I CrossFit, which is a community type of environment. I'm a Peloton fan. That's a community type. Like I gravitate towards communities. But then if you look at my professional life, I have my own firm and there's one other person I work with and that's it. And was able to build out a network and a community of my own through Twitter and just other areas and being at conferences and things, but nothing like what this community, the advisor growth community, provides. And I think that with technology, being able to leverage the internet and Zoom meetings, you can build this community, this safe place to go, communicate with other people. Again, like you mentioned, like-minded, but still diverse enough that we can learn from each other. And it's very easy to do. And getting this set up is not very hard. I think that the tough thing is attracting the right people. But if you're interested in building a community, there's a great book that I read after we started. I just finished it. It's called The Art of Community by Charles Vogel. And it was great for me because there's a lot of confirmation bias in what Taylor and I just naturally did in this book. But I think it expands more upon this conversation that we're having about how humans want a community and what's a good way to structure it and what roles within the community need to be there. Like growing a community successfully and making sure that it brings value to the members is not as simple as just opening up a page for people to get into. There's a lot more to it when it comes to bringing that value, how the community members interact with each other, and also how to make people feel valued in their own way. So it's a lot more work than it looks like, but it is a lot of fun.
So when I was a therapist, I always struggled with the financial aspect of it because obviously, a doctor has to make a living. No one's faulting you for charging for doing what you went to school for. But on the other hand, it felt a little, it felt a little transactional or something. Like I'm sitting here, comforting this person who's grieving the loss of a spouse or, talking to this person who's suicidal or having the worst day of their life. And then at the end, it's like, that'll be $200, please. And so it was always difficult for me to reconcile those things. And I see a bit of that here. Like on the one hand, you're doing this immense social good for the world of finance. you're building an organic community. How do you, of course you're going to charge for this. It costs you money to run it. It costs you time. So of course you're going to charge for this. No one's faulting you for that. But how do you keep this notion of running a successful business and growing an organic community together without having them pollute each other, I guess?
I think charging the fee serves a little bit different purpose than your experience back when you were practicing. Because I would agree. Like, I think of when I end up doing pro bono work for couples that they want to hire me, but I know that the $150 a month that I charge for a subscription is much better in their budget, helping them going down the path they need to go than paying me for ongoing services. So I get that. But with the community, you mentioned, it is a business. Like it's a legitimate business. We have an LLC, and there's cost to running the business. We have staff that help us run it. Again, there's a lot that goes on in the background that a lot of people don't see. So there is cost to running the business. It costs to bring in speakers and do the things that we're trying to do to bring value to the members as well. So it's definitely not a money grab for us. But another benefit of charging is it brings commitment to the table from the community standpoint. We don't want to charge so much that it's prohibitive for everybody, but we don't want just anybody in the community. We want people who are going to come in that are committed. And by having an investment, because it's really what it is, this is an investment in themselves. They're paying to be a part of the community, but we're having weekly webinars. We're having guest speakers. Just yesterday, we had David Perel come speak to the community for an hour and a half. And I think the value that came out of that one single meeting was probably worth the annual fee before you even add in all the other things that you get within the community and the conversation. So I think that the fee is to keep the people who are not committed out, because I think that pulls and waters down the community. It puts a little bit of skin in the game so that you're going to be there contributing and making sure that you get the most out of the community because you have spent some money to be there. So I think that's where it helps us run it, but it also helps make sure that the people who are coming in are committed. And if you have committed members willing to collaborate, I think that just builds a successful community.
Yeah, I found the same thing when I was doing pro bono work. I would hold a couple of pro bono therapy slots mostly for folks from church. And I found very consistently that people, what you obtain too easily, you esteem too lightly, right? People who were getting it free they were my most likely to cancel. They were the most likely not to do the homework and during the week. And there is really something to be said for skin in the game. So, Justin, as we begin to wrap up today, we're going to take you through a little bit of a free association exercise that shrinks like myself like to do. So I'll throw out a word or a phrase, and you just tell me what the first thing that comes to mind is. And I know. And I've prepped you. I'll tell you right now. I prepped you with two of these, and I got two in the bag that you don't know about. So be ready. Okay. So, what's the first book you'd recommend to someone starting out on a financial journey?
So I have two. I have one for financial advisors. They're both from Nick Murray. So for financial advisors, it would be behavioral investment counseling. And that is just because I think that as an advisor, our job is not so much portfolio construction, but behavioral counseling. So I would recommend that. For individuals, I think it would be Simple Wealth, Inevitable Wealth. And again, it's not the numbers type of stuff. It's more the way to view money. So I would throw those two books out. I know you said one, but that's why I hate these things.
No, it's great. No, those are both great books. Great suggestion. The greatest Southern rapper of all time must be Southern.
Southern rapper of all time. Has that to be individual or it could be group?
Can be a group.
Outkast.
That was easy. Individual. I probably have to go T.I. Okay. Well, Atlanta thanks you for your choices. Well done. Okay. Third one is a non-financial community that you admire. Someone that's built a great community outside of the world of finance.
I would say He has a great community within as Rad Reads that he does. And that's a very diverse group that he has. So I'd say what Kay has built is pretty cool.
Yep, friend of the show. He'll be on soon. So he has built a great community. And then the last one is, what is the biggest money mistake that you see most people making in your practice?
It's judging success by looking at others. So keeping up with the Joneses falls into that, but not focusing on themselves, but focusing on society and other people to determine what success looks like for them.
Perfect. As the author of a book called Personal Benchmark, I endorse this message. So, so Justin, if people want to learn more about you, if they want to get a dose of this Justin Castelli authenticity themselves, where can people find you and learn more about your work?
So because I have so many things that I'm doing, I just set up a new website. It's justincastelli.io, and that has links to everything. So I've kind of separated brands out, and All About Your Benjamins has been around for 4 or 5 years now, and that is going to be where I produce content for consumers and clients. And Advisor of Tomorrow is a new blog and a new podcast that'll launch next week that's going to be all for financial advisors. So justincastelli.io houses all of that. There's links to take you there, but that's the one place to go to see everything that I'm doing.
Perfect. Hey, man, you were fantastic. Thank you for joining us this week.
Thanks. I had a lot of fun.